So good morning, everybody, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this excellent conference. I'm going to present a report on austerity that will explain the template that is used for all the adjustment in recent years. This report I started with some colleagues in UNICEF in 2010 because at the time the IMF denied that austerity cuts were applied to developing countries. And following the tradition of Sir Richard Joly, Andrea Cornia, Francis Stewart, who were extremely supporting of this work, we produced a first report in 2010. The report has been produced and updated every X years, also in the International Labour Organization, and this latest version has been co-edited and published by a number of trade unions and civil society organizations that are joined together forces in a campaign to end austerity. And you might be interested to look at that later on. So this is the situation of austerity today. In red, what you have is the countries that are cutting public expenditure in terms of GDP, and in 2022-2024. So as you can see, the whole world is on fire, really. And the gray, actually, most of the gray are actually countries with no data because they have civil conflicts. Yes, and this is done using IMF World Economic Outlook fiscal data, and we don't manipulate the data. What we only do is to summarize it and present it like that. So for those keen on graphs, you can download the report. The reports have 100+ pages with annexes on the countries and things like that. So you can look at that, but I'm just going to present quickly a few slides. This is the story. What you have here, it is, these are the fiscal trends from 2006 to 2025, correct? And these are the number of countries that are contracting public expenditure in terms of GDP. And in dark color, what you have is developing countries, and in light color, high-income economies. And why this distinction was important is because at the time when we started the report in 2010, everybody was saying that austerity was a European problem because Europeans were protesting, demonstrating against it. This was a lie. Actually, the majority of the cuts were happening in developing countries, also in terms of intensity. And so what you have is in 2008, 2009, these were the years of the global financial crisis. And at the time, very few countries were cutting, so that's why the bars are very small. Still, some countries were cutting, which is surprising. But in 2010, which is the third bar, you see a quick increase, then followed by years of increase. And, you know, when we were in the middle, by 2018 or so, we thought, well, this has become the new normal. Because the majority of world countries, there are 193, the majority of them were doing cuts no matter what, no matter they were in an okay fiscal situation. So, and then 2020 is the very little bar, is the year of COVID, and of course very few countries cut. And as you can see later, there is a massive increase on the an amount of countries that are implementing budget cuts. In red are the projections. So this applies to all world regions, and as mentioned, you can download the report, and this is by region. But I want to focus really into the template itself. What are the policies that are being implemented to do these budget cuts? And that the World Economic Outlook will not give us the detail because they only look at the macro data. So for this, what we did is reading hundreds of reports, of IMF country reports, and see the policy discussions. Some were programs, meaning these would have been conditionalities. and others are simply Article 4 consultations, and these are just policy debates that the IMF and the Ministry of Finance has, but mostly reflect IMF advice. And so this is what the template is, and you see it reproduced country to country, mimicked, talk, 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 talk. The first most prevalent measure, austerity measure, is targeting social protection. And this is very odd because in a time of crisis, when you should be expanding the coverage and the benefits of social protection, actually there are being many cuts done. Targeting is contracted to only target those that might be most poor. And that means that many families with children, women, with domestic abuse, persons with disabilities, they are simply their benefits cut. And then they're left with just a targeted benefit to the poorest. And the poorest not even really got. They cannot even target the poorest because actually they're very difficult to reach. They might be homeless and things like that. So only a percentage of the poor really gets that benefit. The second most prevalent policy is what is called public sector wage bill cuts or caps. That means cutting or capping, leaving it the same, the number and salaries of civil servants. And if you look in any public administration, the majority of those are teachers, health workers, workers at the local level, administrators at the local level. All of them played very important roles in society. So cutting or capping them, it has negative social impacts. The third most prevalent measure has been eliminating subsidies, which is mostly fuel, which is maybe positive, but then also food and agricultural subsidies, which much more negative impacts. The fourth most prevalent measure is privatization of public services. But, because this is an extremely loaded term, this is not said like that. Actually, IMF reports avoid using the term privatization. And now they appear as reform of state-owned enterprises. And this kind of brings memories of some kind of Soviet polluting factories, but this, you wonder why this is happening in Honduras or something like that, no? And, and this is because it's not. It means public services like transport, like energy, like water supply. So in this case, what happens, they're either directly privatized or commercialized and left very ready to be privatized. And the following measure is pension reforms, and that's extremely prevalent both in developing and high-income countries. Labor flexibilization reforms, even those that they don't really have any impact on the public budget, but is part of the template that gets applied to all countries. Then, recent times, it has been waiving social security contributions done by employers. Workers have to pay, but employers, however, were waived to give them as a kind of stimulus to enterprises since COVID, at the cost of making social security unsustainable. And then even some minor cuts to health. And because of COVID in recent years, this has been not so prevalent. Then to increase revenue, the main measures have been, in gray, have been increasing consumption taxes or VAT, which is highly regressive, instead of looking at income taxes or others. They also look at that, but in a Mickey Mouse way. The real one applied is increasing VAT or consumption taxes. Then PPPs and fees for public services. So this is explaining that, and overall, what we have here, these policies, what they imply is they are not pro-poor, as is its claim. It's actually a huge transfer of resources to the wealthy. And why? I would like to fix your attention on this one. This will be a world distribution of GDP. This is some study we did also earlier, but it does not matter. You have men and women on each side, and each country has a very similar pattern. All the wealth is accumulated on top, which will be the richest 20%. Then you have a middle class, which is shrinking. Working class they will be the next 20%. Then the poor are 40% of the world population. It will be the below $2 a day. And the last will be the poorest, which is really below $125 a day. So you look at that, all these reforms, you name it, are squeezing the middle and working classes. You cut and privatize public services, you do pension and social security reforms, you do cuts to social assistance or social protection, lower wages, increase VAT, or eliminate subsidies. All of that contracts and squeezes, punishes the middle and working classes. And what is more interesting, the suggested compensation measure that the IMF says, which will be the little bit on yellow, it will be a very targeted, well-targeted safety net to the poor. It's not really any compensation, because the other were universal policies that will benefiting everybody in society. So only, of course, the poor have to be protected, but this is an inadequate compensation measure. And this is the same for women. Actually, the IMF, Emma, who has worked a lot on that, my comment on that, but this safety net is the kind of measure policy that the IMF has learned to say when there is some negative social impact on women or whatever, then you do a little targeted safety net for the poor. That is insufficient compensation. Okay, so I have a number of slides. I see I have 3 minutes to talk. Okay, in case interested. So this is like social security, what is happening. The main block in the middle, it is social insurance, which is the majority where most of the funds for social security go. The very low level will be a social protection floor or social assistance for the poor. And the very top will be private savings, and this will be private pensions that families take to complement the savings. Now, what happens if you realize is that the IFRs are eroding all these public systems. First, because they're suggesting that employers don't pay social security contributions, so they're going to undermine public insurance. Then they're reforming pensions only with a look to sustainability, but not looking at equity. And then they're rationalizing social assistance. So this is how the model will look like. Very, very small social insurance. They say that they are not destroying it, but very, very small. Very, very small social protection floor and a huge private savings, financial sector-driven area. And so who are the winners here? The winners of this policy are really the financial sector, because they are the ones that will benefit from the mobilization of persons just trying to get some time supplementary pension, and the losers will be citizens in general, middle class and workers. So these are pro-rich policies that are going to increase inequality massively. And we have an analysis of that for other policies, but I think it's more known to you, like food and fuel subsidies, like privatization, like PPPs. We know that privatization has negative impacts on prices, on the quality of public services, on jobs, wages, and particularly women, on efficiency, and on long-term fiscal revenues. And, for these reasons, it should not be pursued. These you may be interested. The very critical cases, actually, countries are actually unprivatizing earlier privatizations because they don't work. The critical case is water supply. In water supply, we do have more than 215 municipalities have actually renationalized, but of course this cannot be used because it's considered to be politically loaded, so they say re-municipalized water supply. So now it's public again. The most known case is Paris. And in 1 year of renationalization of the Paris water supply, prices went down 8% and the quality improved, and the coverage too. So there are many more examples. Pensions is the same. Contrary to what they want us to believe, only 30 countries of the world privatized pensions, and this was because of World Bank and IMF support, mostly World Bank. At the time, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and of these 30 countries, 18 have reversed the privatization because it does not work. We can enter more on the details on that. Anyway, we predict, we did another study looking at protest in 101 countries, covering 91% of the world population. And on the austerity front, we can see that protests on austerity topics keep increasing. You can download the study was published by Palgrave and is downloadable. So you name it, food prices, fuel prices, jobs, wages, agrarian issues, reforms of public services, education, health, pension reforms. All of the protests keep increasing in all world regions. So we can predict that we're going to get, and you should see here the all world regions. So we can predict that political instability is going to increase and protests are going to increase because if this policy of austerity continues. And the key thing is that there is no need. All this human suffering caused by austerity, it is really unnecessary because there are many alternatives out there. We have been discussing it yesterday, and I'm sure we're going to discuss them more today. But the first option will be to increase progressive tax revenues, not VAT, but progressive tax revenue. This is a world awash with money. There's a lot of money around it. So it's about taxing it correctly. To start with, wealth taxes, and this is already announced in Iceland and Spain. Taxing with windfall profits, for instance, in the energy sector, there's a large number of countries, many developing, like Angola, Australia, Kazakhstan, Mauritania, Mozambique, they have announced them. Taxing digital services like Amazon. This is also happening in a number of countries like France, India, Indonesia, Kenya, New Zealand, etc. Financial transaction tax has happened in a number of countries too, like Argentina and Brazil, successfully, though they were eliminated by conservative governments later on. Or new taxes to banks' windfall profits, like announced in Spain. Mining and gas taxes. And we have great examples here. Mongolia, for instance, a kind of low-income country or middle-low-income country, finance a universal tax benefit to all children just based on a little tax on copper exports. It's a beautiful example. So we have all these options on tax. Then there are 9 options. So, there are a lot of resources for countries and governments to look at. The other will be to fight illicit financial flows that Leon explained yesterday. Then, restructuring or eliminating debt, and I'm not going to explain that because many here went into that. For social protection or social security will be very important to ensure that employers pay the adequate contributions, and as well that people are given good contracts and they become formalized. They are not part of the informal sector. Then reallocating public expenditures instead of spending so much in defense, let's say, because let's remember that austerity cuts are happening at a time that defense expenditures are increasing. So they could be used for actually social purposes or for development purposes, including climate. And using fiscal and foreign exchange reserves. Yesterday there was talk about the importance. Jan Kregel was talking about the importance of using gold reserves in central banks. So that can be used. Using a more accommodative macroeconomic framework, lobbying for more aid, and new SDR allocations. Many did talk. Whatever it is, these fiscal decisions cannot be taken behind closed doors. Very often they are taken at the Ministry of Finance by some technocrat and IMF or international financial institutions officials. They cannot be the way. These decisions affect the lives of millions of people in each country, so they need to be taken in open national dialogue, knowing, understanding all the full consequences of each of them, of each of the resources and the options. So thank you very much.